My name's Paul Marsh, and we're here today to talk about another tip for developing a bot with the Microsoft Bot Framework. And today's going to be a viewer request to talk about the changes with the configuration files. So let me just remind you where we are. So we've got our main bot here, and we've got this little example bot because I don't want to show you my top secret authoring IDs. But here we've got a quite good example. So we've got some services here, and we've got an endpoint service with some details about the URL it's going to go to. We've got a Lewis service with various authoring keys and a Q&A service with all that various kind of stuff. So we still need all of this stuff. So what's happening? So as always, this is a kind of learning course. So we just type in bot framework. Oh, here we are, bot framework configuration file. And go to the Microsoft documentation for it. So this is the big change here, right? So prior to 4.3, there was a bot file, but that's now been deprecated, and we're told to move everything to a settings file. So a settings file, for those who don't know, is something that has also gone through a bit of an evolution over time. So depending on where you are with your .NET and your ASP.NET, the settings file can mean one of two things, either app settings or JSON settings. In this case, we're talking about JSON settings, so I'll explain what that means. So we've seen our settings file here, and they tell us that we should be moving everything into our app settings file. So here's a little copy of app settings again, because I don't want to share my secrets. So we've got a couple of little things in here already. So if we go back to our example bot, we've got to move all of this stuff out. So what I would suggest you do is you take this kind of inner block here of your services, copy that, and we'll put that directly into our settings file. Now, if you're very keen-eyed, you'll notice that I've got some little kind of error things going on here, and that is because each of these things is going to become a section in app settings. So we need to give it some kind of name. So I'd suggest just saying this is development endpoint, and just give it a little thing there, and then just for the JSON fans out there, you should start the curly bracket there really. And we'll do the same thing here for this, so we can just call this, Lewis. Just leave that on there. And then we call this one Q&A. Right, so that's pretty much it for that. So it's a relatively easy bit of porting you need to do. So we can save that off. Now, if you're familiar with application settings, then application settings was a name and a value pair. And what the app settings JSON files allows you to do is have these more complicated, and these can be as nested JSON as you want. And so this is quite a nice way of organizing when you compare it to an app settings file. So that's why this evolution to this format is now the approved way of doing it. So, okay, we got this. So now what? How do we read this stuff? So back into our startup file. Now, you may have noticed already that we are doing something with the configuration file here. We're getting using get section to get the bot file secret out. So if we come up here, we can see that in our startup, we construct this configuration file. And you can see here, this is where we're adding the JSON file in here. And we're also, by default, we add a JSON file per environment type. So that means if you deploy to production, then the environment name might be called production. If you deploy it to a test environment, it's going to be test. So this way, when you do your deployment configurations, you can have different overwrites of these app settings depending on the particular environment. So that's quite useful. And if you look at actually what we'll do, we'll come to here and we'll also say, so we call it, what's it going to be called? App settings get section. That sounds like a good one. Looks like I've already been here. So this is the configuration, and this is mostly going to see samples to do with ASP.NET Core, because that's kind of where these are mostly used. And here you'll find lots of information about how it's done, the conventions, various ways of adding things. You can have XML providers, all sorts of different ways of doing this. but we're only really interested in the JSON one. So by all means, read all this, get all the information you want out. You'll have some, there's some kind of funky things in here about how you do reading, especially when you've got nested types like we've seen. But I'll leave that to the viewer to carry on reading that, and I'll carry on with the bot. So that's basically how this all gets set up. So now I'm just going to show you how you're going to read it. I'm not going to completely convert this over. This is just a very quick tip session. So we want to get our development endpoint, which is what we get here. So we're not going to use this eventually. We could get rid of this, but just for now, I'll just quickly show you how this stuff works. So development endpoint. So we're going to use the same concept, right? You think? So we'll grab that. Okay, so let's just put a breakpoint here and then run this up. Oh, we don't want bot section. We called it development endpoint. So let's run that. And we got an object. We got an object and a key. Yeah, a path. Oh, and a value of null. Just start thinking to yourself, well, this isn't massively useful. But the way this get section works is, I think it's a bit weird, but it kind of makes sense eventually. He says. So we look at the children because it's got children nodes. So let's run that again. It's got child nodes, not children nodes. Right. So look at the development endpoint again. So now we've got a list, so we can use a little viewer. Oh, and it says that's not got anything in it. What have I done wrong there? Okay. So my problem is that in my original one, I've called this development rather than development endpoint. So I've changed the actual app settings file now. So let's try this again. Demos, eh? Who would do demos? Right. So development. So current is now null. But now the children is showing us all of our different little attributes. So that's great. So that appears to work. So we could sort of stop there and go, okay, you could do the first one, the second one, enumerate over those and get those. But obviously that's pretty tedious. Fortunately, there's a better way of doing this, and it's called bind. So what we'll do is we'll come down here where we're getting our endpoint. So here we're getting an endpoint service. So this is the type that we want in this particular case. So what you need to do is you need to create one. So development endpoint equals a new endpoint service. And then you switch this around a little bit. So we say we bind to the development endpoint. So now when we run, our development endpoint is nicely populated. So hopefully you can see that you can use this sort of technique quite easily to move stuff out of the bot configuration file and into your app settings file. And you can see how you can bind this to all your different types. And then now we can progress into moving forward using the app settings rather than the .bot configuration file. Thanks for listening.